What's up, guys? Connor O'Hanlon here for another episode of the Con O Show. And today, we're going to be discussing a few different topics when it comes to social progress, equality, and they're going to tie together in a weird mishmash of ways. Definitely a weird mishmash of ways. So, we're going to divide it into my normal two parts here. Starting on this front half with equality for women and equality for the LGBTQ community, specifically working towards equality for the trans community. And we're going to discuss some other issues that the LGBTQ community faces moving forward, as that's been something that I haven't been able to discuss as much as other issues on the show before. Later, we're going to tie it all together with yet another Supreme Court case, or potential Supreme Court case, that could be impacting the census. And the census, of course, is super, super important for a variety of different ways, as we'll get into later. And I'll describe to you as to why that is another fight for equality tied in here today. So, let's start off with what has been done since the last time we've spoken that has improved life for women. Now, I'll put the major caveat that this has only happened in one country. This has not happened here in the United States. However, it is important to point this out as we move forward. When we make progress, we should point it out. And whether that's our country or another country. So what I'm speaking to is in Scotland, they made it so that all tampons, pads, you name it, basically women's health products are free for all people. Now, why is that so important? Well, as you may or may not know, when you are born of the female biological sex, you have these things called a period. So that is something that most women can't control, whether they can take birth control or not. Maybe they can, whatever. That is something that is a natural occurring thing in the human and many other species. So when we make products that are specifically designed for that issue, and they cost an arm and a leg sometimes, that is when it's discriminatory against women. Now, you could just say, well, that's capitalism, suck it up, loser. You could say that, and, I don't use these products, so you're kind of preaching to the choir on that because it doesn't bother me exactly. However, this is where a sense of empathy comes in and an understanding that my experience isn't the only experience that matters. So when it comes to this, I don't know what the average cost of this stuff is, to be honest with you. But, sometimes you see dispensers or whatnot in bathrooms, and that's good. But when you have wide range, not just fully, and I say access, but wide range access to this stuff, but access for free at the point of entry, that is when you are fully supporting women, because it's a naturally occurring phenomenon, for lack of a better word, I guess. These things are utilized to make profit off of. We see this in other areas, and this is why it kind of dovetails into other things here. And this is why I'm kind of leading off with it. This can kind of broaden up after. The healthcare system in America, whether that be doctors or whether that be prescription drugs or whether that be, any insurance, it is so different. And the perspective and the imperative of the healthcare system is so different here than it is in other countries that it's hard to comprehend how other countries can pull off what we as progressives ask for when it comes to Medicare for all, or even a fully nationalized healthcare service. And that is because we're so used to the profit-driven motive being justified, being intensified. Now, these products that we're talking about in particular, the phenomenon I'm going to talk about in a second, the pink tax, doesn't really exist for this stuff because, well, you could look at it two ways. It either fully exists 100,000% because men, biological males don't need this stuff usually, and biological women most of the time do, until menopause and all that stuff. But that's what I mean, where it's like it's either the pink tax, which I'll describe in a second, doesn't apply to this because it's like it's already like it's 100% a pink tax for women's products. Men don't have anything like that, and there's no equivalent. Like what? Razors, men and women both use those. I mean, it's that you would have to really, really stretch it to be like, well, men need beard oil. I mean, I like beard oil, but it's not equivalent to the same health products that women need. This is where I can go into 1,000 different ways, but we'll talk about the pink tax real quick. And this is why this is important when we apply it. And sorry, I have lint all over my shirt and it's pissing me off. So where I have, when we describe the pink tax, it's, like I said, men and women both use razors. Now, a woman's razor is more expensive because it's pink. So you could probably compare about 1,000 different types of razors and whatever, and deodorants, the same kind of thing. But they make it more expensive. I would ponder, because in general, women put more emphasis on these things, whether it comes to appearance or scent or whatever, hair. As you can tell, I do put a lot of time into my hair. So, and I care. One of my biggest insecurities is smelling bad. So I'm not saying this in broad generalities to say like, oh, all women care about it. No, I'm not saying that. But broadly, when you're talking about advertising and marketing, most guys don't really care. They wear deodorant, hopefully. But women generally care a little bit more. And that's where this premium kind of gets jacked up, because they can. And, maybe to an extent you could justify making, I don't know. There's some fancy beard trimmers out there, right? And if you had like a razor that was like the equivalent of that, and it's to the nth degree better, whatever, sure, price it wherever. But the difference between just like a 1-to-1, like a normal razor for men and women, there's a significant price difference. And the same goes with, deodorant, hair products, a lot of these like basic level, health products, for lack of a better word. And that is why this type of bill that gets passed in Scotland, which again is part of, I believe it's part of the UK. Now I get the labels of UK, Great Britain mixed up. Believe it's the UK broadly, which I think the UK in total has the same NHS. I'm not 100% sure on that. You guys can fact check me on that. But assuming that it's under the same NHS, or if not the same exact one, a similar NHS, they have healthcare free at the point of service. They have doctors that are employed by the government. And guess what? the quality of their services, I should say, not products, but services, don't go down. Actually, in fact, if you look at statistics on where the best healthcare services are in the world, or healthcare systems are in the world, we can look, and it is Britain, France, Germany, Sweden. Like, you go down the line. And what do they have in common? They all guarantee healthcare as a human right. When we talk about guaranteeing healthcare as a human right, as a progressive, and now maybe my opinion is different from other people, and this also will dovetail into my second part of this, but we talk about I talk about at least providing, birth control to women for free. If you need an abortion, it should be funded. Like, you shouldn't have to be like, we'll talk about the Hyde Amendment for a second. The Hyde Amendment bans federal funds being spent on abortions. Now, we know that abortions are being had no matter what, but when you talk about, I'm sorry, this is a frustrating topic, because when we get the disparity of wealth when it comes to health, it becomes very apparent. You never see those health gurus or the people that promote all this. I don't know. So a lot of people promote pseudoscience. Those people never live in a shed. Like, they're never shooting their videos in a shed, right? The people that are ripping people off and scamming people and jacking their prices off to make a quick buck, they're always in a mansion. They're always in a fancy car. When it comes to somebody that needs a basic health service, not some of this BS, fad diet here or this and that. When someone needs a basic health service, like birth control, your employer, if you're lucky enough to have employer-based healthcare, can deny birth control being covered if they so choose. Again, based on religious liberty. We're going to tie this all together to the Supreme Court, which has been the through line for the last 2 months. In every episode, I've talked about the Supreme Court. They can decide that women's health care is different and worth less, because actually, before Obamacare, being pregnant and being a woman, or I should say the combination of the two, not just being a woman, but I guess you could probably make the assumption, if you got pregnant, that was a pre-existing condition. Now, if you had a pre-existing condition, they could charge you more, or they could deny you coverage outright. Now, of course, moving forward, coronavirus is going to be a pre-existing condition, but what does that matter? Because, not many people got that, right? But going back, these healthcare providers can decide, or I should say the employers can decide to not cover it. When it comes to the case of, once you deny that coverage already, you don't cover birth control, and someone gets pregnant and they need an abortion, now we're going to talk about access to abortion and see how it trickles up from, okay, it might seem stupid. We're talking about, tampons and pads for women's period. It's not, it's not the most amazing topic to talk about on a politics show, right? But instead of it trickling down, it actually trickles up, because trickle down economics, all that stuff doesn't work. Just an aside here. But it works its way up. So we go from, okay, period products being accessible and free to, okay, what about birth control? And now, people could say, well, what about, condoms, or, cost money? It costs so it costs a minuscule amount. I think any woman would probably, any woman that takes birth control would be willing to take the trade of paying the same amount as they do, or because also women buy condoms as well. But regardless, would pay the same amount for that equivalent if they so choose. Now, also, we talk about the disparity here that men, biological males, don't take birth control. We don't have to take a pill, or we really can't. There's not really, I mean, there are some out there, but there isn't like a hardcore, like, this is the way birth control for men. Maybe that'll come, maybe it won't. But women, biological women, are the ones that are tasked, I guess, with taking that if that couple decides to, or she decides to herself, to protect herself from being pregnant. Again, though, if you can't afford it, then it comes to, okay, well, what happens if you get pregnant and then you can't afford to have a baby, or you can't, you never want one. And this is where the wealth and health come in. The disparity of, if you're wealthy, it doesn't matter. You can just get, you have, oh, my alarm's going off. So, you have the access to the healthcare that you need regardless. You have access to birth control if you have wealth. You have access to abortions if you have wealth. And that's, that's not to say anything about the debate on abortion. I'm pro-choice, but when it comes to any of that stuff, it's just a matter of, do you decide and deem half of the population is worthy of having equal health care? This is not a hard topic. When we talk about morality and all of the equality and the principles that the Constitution is founded on, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, they should be equal for all people, at least as equal as they can be. And that is not an argument for equality of outcome. That is an argument for equality of opportunity, which we've discussed plenty of times on this show, but it begs to be said because people like to think in black and white, and they don't, when they hear equality, a lot of people, they assume, and they're conditioned to assume, that anybody that's left of center when they talk about equality is talking about communism. And I will do a full episode one day on the distinctions between all the different ideologies of socialism and communism and Marxism, and we'll get to that. But they always assume it's top-down dictatorial communism because you're talking about equality, which then means that everyone has to be equal 100%. No. We're talking about equality of opportunity based on civil rights, based on human rights, based on, you name it, voting rights. We all want equality in a sense that makes us have opportunity to live the American dream that we were all promised as little kids. And we're just constantly fighting to make that a reality. Now, why it all ties together still is that I'll say the British, because I think the Scottish healthcare system ties into the UK NHS, but those systems provide for their people, and they provide it well. So when we talk about Medicare for all, NHS, any of this stuff, when they talk about the quality going down, they're lying. They either don't know what they're talking about, or they're lying. And that's on them. We have to win the war of the ideas. But that is a major step forward in the world for equality. And it leads the way, hopefully, for American lawmakers to take note. Maybe we make birth control legislatively, you tie it to if employer provides healthcare, they have to provide that. And this is the way that you circumvent Supreme Court decisions, is having the legislative branch actually legislate, which we don't do anymore because, it's too hard. And it's just complete crap. It's just, they're lazy, they're paid off, and they don't want to upend systems that got them there. Let me take a sip. It's 6 a.m. here, so that's why I'm drinking coffee on the video here. But with that, we'll go to the next little part here, which is it was news to me yesterday. So I record these on Wednesday. So it was news to me yesterday when I logged on Twitter, the hellscape that is, that the star of Juno, Elliot Page, formerly known Ellen Page, but he is transgender, and this is if I misspeak at any point, please note that I'm trying to it's when it's somebody that's a celebrity, sometimes it's hard to not associate with their former name or with their former pronouns. So if I make that mistake, I apologize, but I'm going to do my best to make sure I don't. But when he announced that on Twitter yesterday, he was the star in Juno, which is where I knew him, but I think he's in Umbrella Academy, which, if I'm not mistaken, I think is a spinoff from the X-Men, but I should know that. I'm the comic book nerd. I should know that, but I don't know that. I haven't watched this show. But regardless, when someone like him comes out as transgender, and this is a important topic to discuss here before we take the break, it signals to people that it's okay. And, I think we got a little bit of this when, what's his name? Caitlyn Jenner. When Caitlyn Jenner came out as transgender. I was forgetting who I was talking about there for a second. We got a little bit of it. Now, I think when it comes to younger people, most people my age didn't know who Caitlyn Jenner was beforehand. No, maybe I'm wrong because of the Kardashians or whatever. But I think more people would know Elliot Page because I remember watching Juno. And I remember seeing this actor in movies. I never watched the Olympics with Bruce Jenner, right? Just never did it. Never. And I never watched the Kardashians. So as a male myself, it stands out to me more. And it's important that we find people that we can identify the struggle with. We can identify the constant battle of living in the limelight. And if they have the strength to come out as who they really feel like and who they really are, then children or even older, people that are in their 50s, 60s, should feel more open to who they really are and their identities. And, we sometimes put a little more emphasis in celebrities than we should. But when it comes to this stuff, the representation, I've talked about this throughout the show, it really does mean something to see somebody that identifies as transgender on the screen to a young person that might be questioning their gender identity, their sexual identity. It's important. And I just want to take this second to recognize that, and to recognize the I called it a hellscape. I mean, Twitter is a disgusting place sometimes. I saw plenty of blue check marks intentionally, and this is why I say this. I give the caveat of I am a as heteronormative as they come. I am a straight white cisgender male. I'm as heteronormative as it comes. So it's still a learning process for us, for everybody, to make sure that we treat people with respect and dignity, and not everyone gets it right away. And that's where I thought I went to Twitter and I saw it, and there were so many people that were so happy and were so supportive. And then you see the other side. And it reminds you of the endless battle for equality that we have to wage. The war, because people intentionally try not to understand the struggles of somebody that is transgender or is gay or is, any number of things. I mean, we could talk about racial inequality as well. Like, all of this stuff applies. The intentional misgendering of somebody, the jokes here and there, it's disheartening when you see that stuff. And I know it's just Twitter, so like, I'll take it with the grain of salt that I always say to everybody else about when we talk about this stuff. But to see, Dave Rubin, who's a gay man, disparaging Elliot Page because why? I don't know. Because he wants to make more Koch brother money. It's just so embarrassing and disgusting. And that is the front of the war that we have to wage for the LGBTQ community. Because guess what? That is the current target. The transgender community is the current target. By they, I'm talking about specific people that are going after the trans community, the non-binary community, something that we don't talk about enough. All this stuff, they're targeted because they're easier to target because there's less of them. There's not somebody like me at every corner, and there's not someone that actually identifies as non-binary or transgender to defend themselves everywhere. And that's why it's easy to attack them. And then it goes up the rung to gay people, and then it goes up the rung to whatever. And then I know that's literally a slippery slope, but that is how it happens. And it shouldn't take the slippery slope for you to care, but for some people it might. So just keep that in mind. It's important that we have representation for that stuff. I'm going to take a quick break here. If you guys like the show, subscribe on YouTube, give it a thumbs up. You can follow me on Twitter at Con O'Hanlon. You can follow the show at facebook.com/theconoshow. Follow on Apple and Spotify. So I'll be right back. Welcome back to the Con O Show. And today we're going to be keeping on with the struggle and battle for constantly fighting for equality for a lot of people, if not everybody. And this part of the show is going to be, not dedicated, but in a way dedicated to discussing the census. And we're going to start down a little bit of history here. And I try to, I valued, and I do value, the education that I got from my public school district. And I'm lucky to go to school when I went to high school to get an education on important issues. Now, could it have been improved? Yes, of course. Could we have gotten rid of the the act that Reaganomics worked, or the fact that we couldn't discuss the issues of the Bush administration the same way I'm sure now they can't discuss the issues of the Trump administration. Regardless, my education was top notch, and I'm appreciative of it. But that doesn't mean that I assume that everybody knows or was taught, because none of this is. I put this in here. I think I've put this in there before and said this before, but nothing about what I've done when it comes to running for office, or when it comes to this podcast, makes me uniquely smart or intelligent, or any of the words you want to talk about. I happen to study and enjoy this stuff, so I have a knowledge of it. But this is why I don't come in here with the assumption necessarily that everybody knows what I'm talking about. And I have to dive into it a little bit more. So if you know this stuff, bear with me. But it's important because a lot of people weren't given the civics, weren't given the history of how we got here, of how the country came to be. Again, I talked about last week how I actually wasn't taught this in the traditional sense, but the founders, and, don't get me wrong, the founders are humans, so they're flawed, and we talk about this all the time. But when we talk about law and order, we talk about all this other stuff, and the founders were literally rebels and criminals, and we love them for that. We love them for fighting against the tyranny of the English crown. And we adore them for fighting and throwing tea into the harbor to fight against unjust tariffs. So all of this is just a big encompassing of history and why history matters. And I have a project coming soon enough that will hopefully illuminate more of that and tie some of that together for anyone that's interested beyond just my podcast. Stay tuned. But when we talk about the main topic here, as I ramble for 5 minutes about nothing, is the census. And why is this important? Why am I talking about it today? The census is important to us today because we are in 2020, unfortunately still. And we had a census this year. And with Trump still in office, we've seen how the census can be weaponized or attempted to be weaponized. And this doesn't, that's why, this doesn't mean it always works. It doesn't mean that it can't work, the attacks. But originally, and I've discussed this a little bit, is the Trump administration wanted to put a citizenship question on the census. Now, here's your history lesson. The census is a constitutional, it's written into the Constitution. It's a guaranteed, actually, not even guaranteed, a requirement based on the Constitution. Now, I believe the first one was in the 1790s, was the first census, so it was a little bit after the Constitution, but might have been actually 1790 itself. And we do it every 10 years. The reason for this was to count every single person. Let me say that one more time for you. The point of it was to count every single person, not citizen, person. And why is that the case? Well, have you ever heard of this little phrase? It came back from the 1770s. No taxation without representation. What that is referring to is if you pay taxes, and this is about the English crown at the time, but if you pay taxes into a system, you should feel, or you should have, not even feel, representation in your government. Now, of course, here's the bad part of our history. In talking about no taxation without representation, in talking about the original forms of the census, we get to the fact that at the time of the founding of the country, we had slavery. Now, you may or may not have heard of this before, but there was this compromise between the North and the South about, and actually, this is where the North was actually bad, because the North didn't want the South to have more of a population. They came up with the 3/5 compromise. And the 3/5 compromise labeled slaves as 3/5 of a person. And the reason all of this mattered was because the representation in government, and this still applies today, is decided, when it comes to the House of Representatives, is decided, the number of seats in your state is decided by the amount of people in your state. So, even though at the time, say in the 1790s, early 1800s, at the time, slaves were not citizens. They still counted as 3/5 of a person in the US Census. Of course, that's abhorrent, but it goes to show you that at least the intent from the founding was to get an idea of how many people, not citizens, were here. Now, of course, over time things change, and as the slaves were free and etc., the count became more accurate and things became to more equality, as we discussed throughout this episode. And with that came pushback, and it comes pushback when it comes to states, say, like New York, and states like California, and states like Texas, maybe, where there's a huge population, and the small states, or I should say the party that runs a lot of these smaller population states, wants more say in how the government's run. And of course, this ignores the Senate, which the Senate, you get 2 senators from every single state. Even if you have 1,000 people, now that's obviously not real. And even if you have 50 million people, you get 2. So the Senate is already unrepresentative of the population and of the amount of people that are in a state or in a country at this point. And we have parties throughout the history, and a current day party that wants to change the census to fix it for them. And I bring up the citizenship question that Donald Trump wanted in the census because that was the intent. The intent was to scare undocumented immigrants into either one, not responding to the census, or two, into being afraid of being put on a list for, you name it, deportation, for ICE enforcement agents to come to their house, and whatever you might think. Now, luckily, this case was settled and the court decided not to allow it. The Supreme Court decided not to allow the citizenship question. Thank God, because that is a bullshit question to put on the census. Because again, this is not a justification for having undocumented immigrants here, although we can have that conversation at another time. This is about what the census is. If you know the history, and as you do now, you can use it as your shield to protect you against the attacks of somebody that's weaponizing something, or you can use it as the axe, and you can use it as the weapon to go on the offensive, to defend and to protect one of the most sacred things in our country. You know, we talk about originalism, and we talk about the Constitution, and we talk about the Supreme Court all the time now. And we don't really see real originalism. We don't really see real interpretations of the founders, because the founders would never put a citizenship question in the census. They wanted a count of all the people. Now, again, this is the revisionism of activist judges like Amy Coney Barrett, Brett Kavanaugh. Yeah, see how you can turn that around on them. And this is why we have to be willing and able to, like I said, use our knowledge and use our history as the axe and the shield, as the weapon and the protection. Because they're not going to stop when it comes to the Republican Party leadership of Mitch McConnell, Donald Trump, the Supreme Court. You know, the list goes on. This, the Heritage Foundation, the Koch brother, the unnamed assailants in this fight. They're not going to stop weaponizing fear, xenophobia, fake populism, fake patriotism, nationalism. They won't, because it helps them. And what helps them is saving money on their taxes. Because that is what those people care about. Now they gin up the xenophobia, they gin up the racism, they dig it deep, they dig those propaganda claws in there, and they drive it home to those people that don't know any better. And again, this is where it comes into, it's incumbent upon you and I to educate ourselves, and the same of other people. But it's why we can't work under the assumption that everyone had the equal opportunity for education. You know, when I see somebody waving a Confederate flag, sometimes I think, wow, you're an idiot, which they might be. But sometimes I reflect on it and I think, what were they taught that makes them think that that is okay and that is right? You know, I will vehemently disagree with them, and I will vehemently disagree with, and I will probably make fun of them, frankly. like you, especially because we live in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania never was part of the Confederacy, so you kind of are a dunce if you don't know that. But it's incumbent upon us, now that we know our history, to spread the history and spread for this is, and here's the thing. Propaganda isn't inherently a bad word. It's always used in a bad connotation, but it's not necessarily a bad word. So, for a lack of a better word, sometimes getting your rhetoric and your propaganda out is important because it's counteracting. It's educating. I mean, genuinely speaking, what I'm doing can technically be labeled as propagandistic. That doesn't mean that I believe it really is in the connotation of the negative sense, because it's, we always phrase it as a bad thing. I'm just saying this as it's important that we spread the information of, the founders actually said it's for all people, not just for citizens. All of that leads into the new case of Trump versus New York, which basically is challenging because of the fact that the citizenship question was thrown out. They tried to come up with a new way, and this is where we discuss the equality thing further, at least, a new way for the xenophobia and the racist attacks to discount undocumented immigrants. In this case, which is not decided yet, the Trump administration is trying to basically come up with a projection of how many undocumented immigrants live in a certain area to discount them from the census count. Now, that is, again, not the point of the census. If you were an originalist, you would say this is unconstitutional. But we go in circles here because, of course, the originalists aren't originalists. They are activists. They have bias. They live in a world where their future, their kids' future, is contingent upon their legacy, and their legacy is tied inherently to the president that appointed them or the party that appointed them. And I mean, they're not going to say, actually Alexander Hamilton meant when he wrote in Federalist number 2. No. I mean, they might use it as justification, like when they write their opinions. But they're going to skew it, and they're going to, if they make the decision, and that's the trick here. Basically, the Trump administration will say, well, actually in California there's 3 million undocumented immigrants, so they should lessen the count there, which will then lower the representation for California. That's just an example. So we talk about equality. So this is where it hits doubly so. This is both an attack on representation for government and an attack on, frankly, despite the fact that I don't know if I brought this up before, but when you think of undocumented immigrants, you and I might have a different feeling or opinion of this. But when you ask generally anybody, they think somebody that's from Mexico. Now, that's not actually the case. actually most undocumented immigrants come from overstaying visas. There are plenty of undocumented immigrants from Europe, from Asia, from Africa, you name it. Also, the undocumented immigrants that come from Mexico aren't necessarily from Mexico. They come from Central and Latin America, a lot of them. So when you get those base levels, racist, xenophobic attacks, of course they're uninformed, and it's biased. So the whole thing here is talking about why the Trump administration can go after certain groups of people, and it might be deemed okay. It might be ruled constitutional. Might. I'm bringing this to your attention because it's an important case, and it's an important reason why, again, for the 1,000th time, the Supreme Court is so important. Now, we could always say, well, the legislative branch should legislate, and they should be able to fix what the Supreme Court does, which is true. They should. That's assuming we have a legislative branch that cares, or a legislative branch that wants the actual material benefit of the people. And I don't know that we have that. Actually, I know we don't have that. We're gonna have a runoff in the Senate, and if we get both the seats, we'll have 50, and Kamala Harris will be 51. So we can pass something. But my other thought on covering this week was the discussion of the coronavirus stimulus package that was a bipartisan 900 or 800 something $billion thing, and I decided not to cover it because it was just going to be enraging, first of all, and it probably won't pass anyway, because all of these bipartisan things, when they come at you with that word, bipartisan, you should be trained to have your ears perk up, because bipartisanship is a Trojan horse a lot of time. Not always. But bipartisanship, when you take the party that is supposed to be, and I'm a Democrat, so I'm pushing for the party to become more of the New Deal style Democrats that we had back in the day. When you have a party that pushes for that and another party that pushes for pretty much the opposite, going halfway usually means the corporate elite, the wealthiest of us all, make off like bandits when, in this bill, you get $300 for unemployment insurance during a global pandemic, mind you. The trade-offs are so clear, and the equality piece is so clear when you look at it through the lens that I'm trying to provide for you. This is why the long-form podcast media is good for someone like me, especially, is because I can just sit here scramble-brained, spew it out for you, and you can take away whatever you like. If you take away one thing from today's episode, then my job is done. That's a success. If you don't, then I need to step it up, or maybe I'm just boring or whatever, and you're not interested in the topic. But it's important, and it's key to spreading information that we have these discussions that go into the nuance, because again, it's not black and white. It's not Democrat good, Republican bad. It's not. It really isn't. I mean, I wish it was that simple. I wish the world operated that way, but it doesn't. And that's why we have to dive into sometimes where we have Joe Manchin, when we have Chris Coons, where we have Jim Clyburn, where we have these centrists that want to, and Jim Clyburn less so than the other two, but Jim Clyburn's just been in the news talking about like specific things recently. And that's I'm bringing his name up because I forgot his name a couple weeks ago when I was discussing cabinet positions, and when I was discussing races in Georgia and blaming progressives, basically. So these people want to, specifically Joe Manchin, Chris Coons, people like Susan Collins in the Republican Party, want to pinpoint themselves as the deciding factor, as they were formerly known in the past, the Gang of Eight, the people that were, the bipartisan, the Brian Fitzpatrick, where he's trying to be the best of both worlds, the independent most ranked congressman in the U.S. Nah, dude, you're a Republican. You vote with Trump. And these people want the spotlight. They are narcissistic, egotistical, and they really don't have the interest of us in mind. Or maybe they do. But they think that a stimulus in which doesn't really help the middle class or working class people or the people in poverty or everybody, but just the corporate elite. They think that helps you and me and your family. It doesn't. It never has. It never will. So, all of that today is to say, the fight for equality is a constant struggle. The fight for freedom, the fight for equity, the fight for liberty, the fight for the pursuit of happiness is always a battle. You and I can wage it together, because we have to show solidarity with people that are different than us, as we talked about earlier, and people that are the same as us or similar to us, because that is how solidarity works. We fight together for the collective goal of improving Americans' lives. And again, providing for people the economic opportunity that they all need. So, with that being said, that is all for this episode of the Con O Show. I will see you guys next week. Be sure to hit the subscribe button down below. Hit the follow button on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Follow me on Twitter. Follow the show on Facebook.com/The Con O Show. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will talk to you guys very, very soon. And until next week, stay safe. Peace.